We all know trees are important. However, South Africa isn't exactly known for its forests. In fact, of the 1.7 million hectares of existing forests in South Africa, 1.2 million hectares are covered by plantations. These plantations are established through afforestation, which not only increases carbon capture but also enhances and conserves biodiversity. 80% of South Africa's timber plantations are certified by the Forest Stewardship Council, which is the highest degree of forest certification in the world. South Africa's forestry sector is viewed as environmentally, socially, and economically responsible. Knowing very little about forestry, I was curious to find out more about this industry and what the future might hold. Hi, I'm Marissa Manech, and you're listening to the Woven Experiences podcast. Here we share stories around important topics and explore the interconnectedness between ourselves and the world around us. Let's get into it. Today's guest is Zimbili Sibiya, a forestry student currently completing her PhD at Stellenbosch University, South Africa. Welcome to the Woven Experiences podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Marissa. It's really exciting to be here and I look forward to the conversation.
Well, Zimbili, my first question to you is, why did you decide to study forestry in the first place?
Well, actually, my mom introduced it to me. She brought it up when I was trying to figure out what I want to do with my life in high school. And when she brought it up, to me it was a bit foreign. My perception of forestry was totally different. It was basically the people who wake up early in the morning to work in the bushes. And it was very unattractive, at least to me. So when she brought it up, it had a bit of a different impact on me in the sense that it was different. And even when I spoke to other people about it, when I started doing more research, I realized that there was a lot of people who actually knew about it. And I liked that it was, and I don't even know what the right word is, probably like unusual, not the common direction a lot of people would take. So I was quite drawn by the fact that it was unusual, at least in my community and where I came from, to study forestry.
Okay, well that's interesting. Why is so little known about the industry, about forestry as, something to study or a sector to work in?
I'm actually going to speak on at the time when I was exploring and learning about forestry. To me, in my experience, nobody really spoke about forestry unless it wasn't like forestry would say, abantu abasebenza emahlathini, which is people who work in the forest. And so, but like the image of that was hard labor. It was more of the people who does the hard labor in forestry and not much on the management side. So my perception of forestry then was just limited, extremely limited to that. But I think it's also because it's one of those careers that are not the most popular ones to tell a person that, oh, you should do forestry. And because they are not so mainstream. And even like if people hear about it, it's always so strange. Like some of the reactions I'd get, for instance, on campus when I tell people that I get I'm studying forestry, especially in the early years of my undergrad, it would be such a shock. And then they ask like, you guys, they're cutting trees. And then I'm like, no, we do cut trees, but we also contribute to, the whole value chain of producing trees all the way to cutting them. So the opportunities even, it's a bit difficult for me to speak about it now But at the time, one of the drawbacks, but like one of the things that made it very attractive also is that they were actually looking for more women, specifically black women in the industry. So to me, that was a winning card as well, because I had almost more confidence that I would be able to get a bursary to study forestry. So I really, I'm not really sure about other people as to how much they know, how they get exposed to forestry. But in my case, I didn't know much except the people who works in the forest.
Now, what kind of challenges did you face while studying? Was there anything unique to you?
Well, interestingly, and I need to say this, this is very much a Zimbili experience of Stellenbosch. So I really just want you to be mindful that it was my experience. One of my biggest challenges were the studying, especially, I came from an Afrikaans school. So academically, I was Afrikaans, and going into my lectures, even I went into the Afrikaans groups. So that worked, but then what didn't work was that our textbooks were in English. So to me, I used to translate my work from the English textbook to the Afrikaans textbook because I studied that way. But then it took too much of my time, and it became very unsustainable. And what was also interesting was that the one module, because in first year you do general BSc, and then the curriculum then it would be general BSc, and then we'd have a 1 year module that is introduction to forestry. So in the forestry module, it was mostly lectured in English. So to me, that was like, I'm doing myself a disservice, and trying to stick to how I study, and especially keeping it Afrikaans for me, it wasn't going to be sustainable. So I had to change my way of studying, especially just like the language of learning. But I only did that in second year, and actually try to learn and study English. So that was a challenge, but definitely overcame it. And now I just it's like very much English. So that was one of my first year challenges, like on an academic level. And obviously some of the modules were really challenging, and there's also one module in just my whole undergrad that was very difficult, and I don't know why, but it also has a bad reputation in terms of student experiences. But doing genetics was very hard, and it was actually the one of two modules that so in my undergrad I failed 3 modules. One was forestry, the other one was conservation ecology, the other one was genetics. And but like genetics was one of the most challenging modules for me.
Forestry, like so many other fields, were perhaps seen to an extent as a field for men. You mentioned hard labor and people working physically in the forests. How has that changed from your experience?
I'm quite privileged actually, to to be in the industry at this time, and I'm very much speaking of where I am as a student per se, and as a female student, because I haven't worked in the industry. I've only been in there, just for field work. But I had a great insight to what it used to be like when I was part of a panel in Women in Forestry webinar, like in August. And through that, I actually realized how grateful many of us should be, especially like as women, because there's a lot of women who struggled greatly in the industry, being a woman. And one of the key things that happened, there's a woman who shared a story that that reached to my core, man. When she joined forestry in like the 90s, and when she was still a student and being exposed to forestry, she was ill-treated as a woman and looked down on, but she persevered. And her story was a reminder to me that I'm able to be in forestry and almost not always notice. And very important, I'm speaking from a student perspective and what I'm experiencing, so not necessarily in the industry. So to not feel judged or questioned that I'm a woman in forestry. So I almost just felt like I belong here. There's no question why I shouldn't be here. Yeah. That's how I perceived it. But understanding where all that came from gave me great appreciation to the woman in forestry who has been working there very hard. But what I also noticed, for instance, in my first year, our group of forestry students, we have forest science and then we have wood science in our institution. So, and then it's like they fall under the forestry department. So our forest science group was like mostly women, and there's probably like 2 or 3 guys. I don't really remember, it was a while ago. But there was just like more women than there were guys, which was also very affirming to me that, I thought at the time, like, it's not a thing anymore. But that is obviously not the most true, because there are women who are still, facing certain discrimination in the industry. And I cannot say that it doesn't happen because I haven't experienced it. But what I like in terms of progression, like there is many barriers that has been broken and continues to be broken. So from managerial positions all the way to the actual field work, where the woman would be, and in inverted commas, would doing the soft work. They wouldn't be carrying the heavy equipment or even driving some trucks, for instance. But now you see the women driving the trucks, you see women being supervisors, you see women being trained to use like different equipment, to operate different equipment in the industry. So to me that is very exciting, and I it makes me more excited about what the future looks like in forestry for women.
Yeah. Now you've mentioned wood science and forest science. I didn't even know these existed. Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Okay, I'll try my best to explain it without dumbing any of the two down, because there's quite a lot more to each, that is involved. So forest science, if I just look at the forestry value chain from the tree being planted all the way to, let's say, a table being created. So the forest science is the part of the value chain where a site is being prepared for a certain species to grow there, like, and that would be a tree, for instance. So a certain tree species to grow there based on the conditions. So we need to understand those conditions in which a certain species favors for us to plant that tree. But then planting that tree means that we need to also help it grow into a tree that will have the necessary wood characteristics to be used by the wood science people who are more on the production side of things. But then at the same time, so that comes from the planting, the preparation of the soil, weed control, conservation areas management, and then the pruning and the thinning, of the trees. But then also, let me think. Okay, then there's the harvesting, which is clear felling. But then within that, you also then get the operations that are being done. That also matters, to just like manage a whole plantation.
Yeah.
And I think something to highlight for anyone who is curious, we don't really have a lot of natural forests in South Africa, so we plant most of our trees. Like, we rely on plantations. So you'd find us speak of plantations rather than just a forest, because we plant our trees. And that's why they look, these beautiful, perfect rows sometimes. So that's that. Then the wood science guys, they're on the production side. They're the ones who make use of the wood. They turn it into different products, from the paper that everybody knows about to certain clothing. And I know there's also some things in the tech industry that is from the cellulose in the wood. I just don't have a lot of knowledge around that for me to meddle with. But basically, wood science is on the engineering part of forestry, if I should put it that way, and the production of whatever products we make with the wood.
Okay, well, kind of with that in mind, why is the forestry sector so important to South Africa?
Yeah, Marissa, I think, any sector that contributes to our economy is important. And when I just look at, focusing on forestry, it contributes about 1% to our GDP.
Yeah.
But we also export quite a lot, to other countries, because we are able to have shorter rotations of our trees. Yes, there are non-indigenous trees, and there's other arguments around that, but they grow very well in South Africa, which make them really good species for us, to work with and to produce what we want at the end of the day, like the wood chips, the pulp, and in planks, whatever. So I do think that it's important, but I think something that a lot of people are not very much aware of is that there's a huge encouragement and drive towards being sustainable forest management, and which is what I think makes forestry also such a forest, like the forest sector, for instance, which I think makes it also special, is that our natural resources are very sustainable. We can actually regrow them, and how we manage them is also important for us to be very sustainable about it. And something that some people may not be very much aware of is that we actually do conservation management as well, where you'd find that a certain plantation may have previously remove some of the natural growing trees in a certain area, but then there's certain spots that are legally bound to be protected in a certain plantation for conservation reasons. And even when we want to harvest, I don't know if everyone does this in the industry, but it's one of the things that I've learned that is necessary, is that even when you go harvest a plantation, you need to go back to the books about your plantation, and actually know, in this compartment, are there any potentially what species are in here, and you must investigate if there aren't any nests around that area that could be damaged. It's not like the easiest and most perfect approach, but that responsibility of being conservationally mindful about the forest practice is something that happens in South Africa, not as much as we'd like to, but I think it's being considered when we talk about sustainable forest management.
The forestry sector employs around 165,900 workers and provides about 62,700 direct jobs and 30,000 indirect jobs. Forestry also provides livelihood support to 652,000 people of the country's rural population. During Level 5 lockdown, some of the industry's goods and services were declared essential and continued to operate. However, many of the other industries that usually pay for these goods and services were no longer in business. The forestry sector is known for its resilience. It was still active during level 5 lockdown. However, with the aftermath of magazine publishers closing and other businesses closing, have you noticed how it's been adapting or changing?
Well, obviously, on my perspective, especially on my side as a student, we were not considered essential services as the people who actually are fully integrated and work in the industry. But because of my research that I'm doing, I got to have quite a couple of conversations with people in the industry, and there's obviously been an impact, even though they were open, where they were still functional, like some of them actually were still functional, but I think companies also took a stand on being safe from their side. So there were like very limited operations happening based on what they felt was necessary, but for some of them also because of their markets, they export some of the timber or the chips, for instance. That did not happen, so that impacted a lot of operations until today, where they have to reduce the volume that they are harvesting. And if they are not harvesting, because it's a whole cycle, it impacts other operations that needs to be slowed down. And you know how with anything that requires that, anything with plants, for instance, when you need to plant them, you are dependent on seasons. So now, especially in some areas when it's planting season, it's a bit of a challenge because some of the areas are not ready. Sorry, they haven't harvested for planting, if I should put it that way. So they had to reduce the annual volume in some way because the market would not receive it. So even though it was still open, like it wasn't as feasible. It just from what I've gathered, with the people that I spoke with who are currently in the industry, work in the industry, it wasn't feasible for them to continue with business as usual, considering that the market was impacted. But I do think that obviously, things are going to be better.
Yeah.
And I have hope. But definitely, especially with the pulp market, it was very much impacted negatively. But I don't know what it looks like now. I'm not sure. So we'll see.
Well, I think it's the non-essential students that are going to change and improve the industry. In fact, you're currently completing your PhD. Can you tell us a little more about it?
Oh, my PhD project is on looking at using technology-based approaches to improving operational efficiency. So basically, but for small scale and medium scale growers in forestry, and specifically for the target group, because we have like a lot of research has been done in contributing greatly to new equipment. And when we say advancing with technology, we're not just only looking at the type of equipment, but also in my case we want to look at how can we also use the existing technology to improve operational efficiency without compromising the economic benefits, or even improving the economic benefits of those operations. And specifically on small scale farmers, because some of them are still extremely manual, or they use extremely manual equipment that can be in a way too demanding for the type of workload that they'll be doing. So we also want to see how can we improve some of the tools for it to be more appropriate for those conditions, but also not to necessarily just use a machine and say this is the new equipment, but to improve that equipment so that they actually get the most out of it.
Well, I think that is definitely going to benefit the forestry sector. And with that kind of information, what impact do you want to make on the industry in your career, in your lifetime?
The impact I'd like to have in the industry, well, it's mostly contributing to improving like the forest operations in a way that ensures and protects people from the work. That people don't suffer with long-term illnesses or disorders because of the exposure to that work. So ensuring that whatever equipment we use and the way the work is being done, that it doesn't impact the person's physical well-being in the long run. And obviously that can be improved with different machines. However, it's not always the answer. Like, mechanizing, for instance, not always the answer to fixing this problem. So it's also looking at making it affordable and accessible to others who may not necessarily have the means to buy a giant machine that needs a lot of ergonomic benefits. But even like just the way the work is being done, the design of the tool that is appropriate enough for a small scale timber grower to confidently use that tool, knowing that it won't have a significantly negative impact on the person's physical well-being in the long run. Yeah. So I'd like to contribute greatly in the industry on continuously improving operations and equipment throughout the spectrum, from a small scale timber grower to a large scale timber grower.
Well, that is very ambitious, given from where you are, where you're going. Looking back, what advice would you give to your younger self before you embarked on this journey you're currently on?
Advice to my younger self? Well, I really can't think of anything, because I'm quite happy with how my journey has unfolded so far. Like there isn't. I'm really trying to think what I would change or what I'd like Zimbili to be more aware of or mindful of. It's a bit challenging for me to think of something, but I think I'm quite happy with how my journey has unfolded as a forestry student. So okay, maybe Zimbili, when you decided to join forestry,
okay,
I know you're excited, but I'd like to encourage you to explore the different platforms and opportunities to constantly engage with the industry in whichever way. So all the platforms that allows you to be engaged with the industry, I really encourage you to invest in those. So yeah, that would be the advice to Zimbili 6 years ago.
Investing in an industry like forestry is essential to our future as a global nation. Sustainability and environmental conservation is vital to overcoming the climate crisis. Let's engage with the industries that can make that happen. Thank you, Zimbili, for your insights into an industry that I certainly wished I knew more about. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode, and be sure to subscribe to this podcast to avoid missing out on any future episodes. I'd appreciate it if you could leave a review, and if you have any thoughts on today's episode or perhaps topics you would like me to touch on, you can contact me via email. A link is provided in the description. I hope today's episode provided some new insights to what it means to be human, and I hope to see you in the next one.